All right, so just to continue on our discussion of the military as a kind of homosocial environment, what we're really talking about here is uh, to view the military as a kind of an example of a male-dominant social environment. So to say that it is homosocial means that it's the relationships between men that become a sort of backbone of the military as a patriarchal institution. So homosocial relationships between men and other men suggests that these relationships are the foundation or backbone of a kind of male-dominated social order. So that's not to say that women are not a part of this environment, but they have not traditionally or historically often been excluded, or they have been often excluded. And the backbone or foundation is what I'm talking about of the institution of the military is patriarchal. So if we see this as true, then we can look more closely at some of the homosocial relationships between men that exist and that support the patriarchal foundation of the military. So in any homosocial relationship, it can take many different forms. So you can have relationships between men that form friendships or mentorships. So there might be a relationship between a younger cadet and his senior officer that could be typified as a kind of mentorship. So or he sees him as a role model and tries to emulate his behavior. Another way of viewing the military bonds between men is a kind of almost like a brotherhood, and this is the ideal that is often promoted. So with your fellow soldiers, you form a kind of brotherhood of men. You care about these fellow soldiers as if they were your brothers, and it's a bond that's going to sort of last a lifetime. Some critics have even referred to this type of bonding as a kind of fraternity almost. So uh, one critic, Paul Highgate, suggests that the military actually functions like this is his term, fratriarchy. So it's like a patriarchal a band of brothers that often sort of promotes conformity and compliance to your unit. So your fellow soldiers are your brothers. And this environment can be sort of toxic or exclusive, I guess, to women or anybody who is considered other or different than this sort of patriarchal norm. So it's not surprising that this environment also sort of fuels notions of hypermasculinity, and they become very sort of heteronormative in this environment. And there is an underlying sense of sort of gender anxiety and gender policing that can exist in a homosocial relationship. So you do have a sense that gender roles, gender norms are being enforced, and anyone who sort of doesn't fit the ideal or the norms of this environment can be punished or ostracized. And we've talked about this already, but the homosocial environment sort of heightens the gender anxiety that someone might experience in this environment where conformity is so important. So we can start thinking about how the military is almost like a frat structure, like a fraternity, where brotherhood and male relationships between men form a kind of background of power and privilege. So this is one way that we can view the military as a kind of patriarchal structure. So are as we are reading our course texts, we can also try to find examples of gender anxiety or representations of conflict within our characters as they face and are confronted or challenge some of the expectations surrounding masculinity. And we can go back to this idea put forth by gender theorists like Jackson Katz and Michael S. Kimmel and others who have talked about masculinity as a kind of mask or front, a facade that is put on and worn almost like a shell or armor. And in this regard, masculinity is sort of taught to young boys, and they wear this mask as a kind of, defense mechanism or a way to hide any behaviors or thoughts or feelings that are unmasculine or deemed weak or feminine under cultural norms. And in the military, this is no different. So, you have to think about a soldier being placed in a situation where every instinct tells you to be afraid and to fear for your life, to panic, and they're taught to ignore those feelings or mask those feelings, right? So they have to put on this tough guise, this tough mask of the warrior and suppress or repress any feelings that are deemed unmasculine. So this mask is kind of a metaphor for the conflict that men or soldiers face when they are put in life or death situations and are faced with, horrors that we can't even imagine. And this artwork that's included on this slide is from Danny Quick, and it sort of is an interesting visual representation of the mask that a soldier might wear. So he's putting forth a very sort of stoic, emotionless or emotionally detached mask, while on the inside he's obviously struggling with, all his feelings that are being suppressed. So this is sort of how we can understand some of the struggles faced by soldiers in the military. And we'll talk a little bit more about PTSD, but you'll notice the title of this painting is Defacing PTSD, or Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. So we'll talk a little bit more about how traumatic conditions can instigate a breakdown of this tough guise, right? So your defenses are shattered or broken. So one of the recurrent themes that we'll discuss as we get into our literature of this term is this idea of trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. So as we read, we'll find examples of soldiers who face situations that are traumatic and life-changing. So there's a lot of sort of different examples in the literature that we'll read, but the results are an array of symptoms that the soldiers that surface following a traumatic event. And post-traumatic stress disorder is characterized as psychological distress that follows from a traumatic experience. And often that experience includes intense fear and a sense of helplessness. So in a war situation, feeling like you're powerless or helpless, and having either your body or your mental integrity breached or destroyed, or distressed in some way. This can lead to a range of symptoms, often long after the event has ended, and it can be re-experienced. So the pain and trauma of that moment can be relived in the symptoms of the soldiers who are struggling with post-traumatic stress. Often there is a reliving of the moment in nightmares or flashbacks, even hallucinations. Feelings of depression and isolating oneself are also part of this. Having troubles maintaining relationships, and there's also sort of high rates of addiction and suicide amongst veterans who are struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder following military service. So in this artwork that's included on this slide, we have the Dorothy Arts Collective releasing a line of army men. So these will be sort of recall the childhood toy, the little army toys that boys would play with. However, these soldiers are imagined as post-traumatic stress disorder, soldiers who have post-traumatic stress disorder. So one is missing a limb, one is begging for money, one is about to shoot himself in the head, and the other is battering his wife. So these are just some of the struggles, psychological distress that soldiers with post-traumatic stress have exhibited in the past. And this is one of the themes or ideas that will become most prominent in the literature that we're reading. So how does a traumatic moment in one's military service, how can it sort of fragment or split one's sense of self, their gender identity, and change their life? So we'll look for that while we're reading as well. So part of this idea of post-traumatic stress will also be faced by soldiers who feel at conflict with their military service. So we'll look at representations of soldiers who feel conflicted, divided within themselves, torn between their own personal beliefs and what they've been taught in military service. So the duality can take many different forms. It could be a soldier who no longer believes in the cause, or feels the war is justified and does not want to serve his country any longer. It could be a soldier being sort of disillusioned or divided by his sense of duty. It could be conflict with one's perception of masculinity or gender identity, and how that has not, that fantasy of who you are, who you thought you could be, it doesn't live up to the reality of the experience. And it could also just be that breakdown of that mask, that tough guys, and conflict of having to hide one's, inner self from the external world. So all of these conflicts will be evident in the text that we read, and we can look for examples of duality and conflict as we look at the course texts. And the artwork that's included on this slide is, I thought, an interesting example of how soldiers have depicted their identity in a mask form. So this is the artwork prepared by soldiers in an art therapy program who have been suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think it is a very sort of a strong visual representation of that divide, that sense of duality and conflict in the mask, and how each of these masks is sort of divided in half. One side obviously dealing with a kind of internal struggle with memories, with the realities, the horrors that were faced, and with feelings, and then the other side sort of how they are still attached to